Good morning and welcome to our next installment, our next episode, program, lesson, whatever you want to call it, in this 12-week series, Step by Step with Jesus. We're in week 11, so the end is in sight. We'll have another week to finish. Then I think, just to catch our breath, we'll have a week off, I'm suggesting. And then we come back for another 12-week installment. This is part 3, Step by Step to the Coming King. As the name kind of indicates, that's going back to the Old Testament and looking forward to the coming of Christ. The prophecies, really, the stories, the promises, the prophecies of the Old Testament. We often read those things, particularly at Christmas, and this will basically take us up to and probably into the new year as well. And then we will be done. That will be the end of our 3 months, 6 months, 8 months, 12 months, however long, not 12 months, but, many month course, many months, which we didn't anticipate when we started. And that's how these things often unfold. We're on week 11 now, and we're thinking about the resurrection of Jesus. We've commented on the shape of the story, coming right down to the depths, going right up to the heights. And the resurrection is the turning point that gets us from humiliation to exaltation. And that being the case, I think it's good to focus on the resurrection as an historical event, and it's certainly presented as such in the Bible. In fact, it could be argued that it's the most important historical event of all time, because it's never happened before, it's never happened since. And the way in which the Bible presents it is the turning point, not just of this story, like you'd read, Macbeth or Hard Times by Charles Dickens. Many great stories have this turning point where things change, people change. It's not just interesting as part of a story. This is God's story, and it's also the story of human history, because this God came right into the middle of human history. So this is the great turning point of the human race, of the history of the world, of the history of the cosmos, we might say. So nothing is bigger than this. Nothing is more important than this, of course. And all the evidence points in that direction, that this is not just some mystical event. It's not an hallucination. They weren't deceived or deceivers. People have always tried to argue that, but there's no evidence for that. All the evidence points rather that this is an event that happened in space and time, a unique event, and the most important thing that's happened in the history of the world. But as well as seeing it from that perspective, the Bible also presents it as an event which has profound personal significance. It's not only changed human history, it changes your history and mine, if indeed it becomes real in our experience. I remember a lady on one occasion, I was sort of an older woman who was in one church that I was in, and we were doing simple little Bible studies. We might even have been doing this together. And we got to the point, she seemed to agree with everything. I thought she'd become a Christian, and the next conversation was going to be about baptism. And then she suddenly said, well, yeah, but there's just one little point I want to go back to. I'm not 100% sure about. And I said to her, yeah, what's that, Gwen? And she said, all that stuff about the resurrection, I'm not really sure that really did happen. So we were right back to square one, The house of cards had collapsed. Well, it was a house of cards if you haven't got the resurrection in the foundation. But thank God, over time, she did come to believe it, and she was baptized, not by me. I'd moved on from that church by then. I heard of that happening many years later. And it's better, to do it like that. It's better not to rush people in to things. It's better to be absolutely sure, as much as we can be, that this indeed is what somebody is convinced of, and that it makes a difference to them personally. That lady was really very confused. She was confused about most things in life, actually. She'd had a very troubled background, a very sad background. But the resurrection was the key to having victory over confusion, but she was confused about the resurrection. So she even had to have that confusion blown away by the power of the risen Lord himself. That's what we find in our story today. It's in Luke 24, verses 13 to 35. It's quite a lengthy story, but it really is one of the greatest stories that illustrates what we're looking at, that the resurrection can scatter our confusion and bring a very personal transformation into our lives. But to be honest with you, in the Bible and just in literature, it's one of the most beautiful short stories ever written, sometimes called the two on the road to Emmaus. So beginning at verse 13, Luke 24. Now that same day, two of them were going to a village called Emmaus, about 7 miles from Jerusalem. They were talking with each other about everything that had happened. As they talked and discussed these things with each other, Jesus himself came up and walked along with them, but they were kept from recognizing him. He asked them, "What are you discussing together as you walk along?" They stood still, their faces downcast. One of them, named Cleopas, asked him, "Are you only a visitor to Jerusalem and do not know the things that have happened there in these days?" "What things?" he asked. "About Jesus of Nazareth," they replied. "He was a prophet, powerful in word and deed before God and all the people. The chief priests and our rulers handed him over to be sentenced to death, and they crucified him. But we had hoped that he was the one who was going to redeem Israel. And what is more, it is the 3rd day since all this took place. In addition, some of our women amazed us. They went to the tomb early this morning, but didn't find his body. They came and told us that they'd seen a vision of angels who said he was alive. Then some of our companions went to the tomb and found it just as the women had said, but him they did not see." He said to them, "How foolish you are, and how slow of heart to believe all that the prophets have spoken. Did not the Christ have to suffer these things and then enter his glory?" And beginning with Moses and all the prophets, he explained to them what was said in all the scriptures concerning himself. As they approached the village to which they were going, Jesus acted as if he were going further, but they urged him strongly, "Stay with us, for it is nearly evening, the day is almost over." So we went in to stay with them. When he was at the table with them, he took bread, gave thanks, broke it, and began to give it to them. Then their eyes were opened, and they recognized him, and he disappeared from their sight. They asked each other, "Were not our hearts burning within us while he talked with us on the road and opened the scriptures to us?" They got up and returned at once to Jerusalem. There they found the 11 and those with them assembled together and saying, "It is true, the Lord has risen and has appeared to Simon." Then the two told what had happened on the way and how Jesus was recognized by them when he broke the bread. Amen. A truly remarkable story and a truly wonderful telling of that story. And I hope you can see here we've got two people. We're going to go into this now in a moment, but two people broken, depressed, confused, and the reality of the risen Lord drawing alongside, entering into their hearts, scatters the confusion, and they are utterly transformed. That's what the resurrection can do for us. Now, here we have these two men. Traditionally, we say it's two men. I'm not sure it actually says that. I've heard it commented that it could be a couple. Well, who knows? Anyway, these two people, we'll say it's two men because most people think it is. They're walking, they're talking. They're going from Jerusalem to Emmaus. That's a 7-mile journey. And as they're doing that, it says they were talking with each other about everything that had happened. Well, we know what those things are. These are disciples of Jesus. They're part of the band, not the 12 disciples, but they're part of the slightly bigger band, not that many more. And their beloved leader, their master, the one they thought was the Messiah, has been crucified. They all forsook him and fled. But now they've heard these strange rumors that he's alive from the dead. And of course, they are confused and bemused. They don't believe that. It's come from these women. They don't know what to make of it, but they don't believe it. Because that kind of thing, it just doesn't happen. As they're walking and talking, it says Jesus himself came up and walked along with them. Now, they were kept from recognizing him. That implies that God himself somehow sort of not blinded them, but sort of kept them from seeing the full reality of who this Jesus was. Also, although this is the risen Lord, he's not exactly flying around he's not on a flying carpet, is he? He's not drawing attention to himself in that way. I think the main thing is they weren't expecting it. They didn't believe it. These things don't happen. So he is just a stranger walking and talking with them. And this is very ironic. It's almost laughable. It's certainly sort of, there's a slight humor in this, I think. They're talking about the one who has joined them, and they don't know who he is. And these men were feeling very confused. Why? Well, verses 17 to 20, because they were sad. The one that they loved, their beloved leader, has been taken from them, and in the most brutal and terrible way. What are the things they're talking about? About Jesus of Nazareth. He was a prophet, powerful in word and deed, before God and all the people. They say, the chief priests and our rulers handed him over to be sentenced to death, and they crucified him. He's gone. And I can remember a dear friend of mine at the funeral. We put him in the ground, and his wife just came up to me and she said, Keith, he's gone. Terrible sense of loss and grief and pain. And that's what they're feeling. But it's not just that they were sad, they were also disappointed. Verse 21, but we had hoped that he was the one who was going to redeem Israel. It's not just that they're sad at the loss, they'd invested all their hopes in this man. They thought he was the Messiah. Well, he is. And look what they say. We hoped that he was the one who was going to redeem Israel. I'm sure by this they meant redeem in a kind of social, political, military sense. Redeem, liberate us from the Romans, set the Jewish people free, and exalt us to be what those promises in the Old Testament, we think, indicated that we'll be the top dog ruling over this world. And Jesus, with his amazing miraculous powers and his wonderful heavenly wisdom, he didn't have an army, he didn't have tremendous weaponry, but he had supernatural powers, and we were convinced he was going to do this sort of coup d'etat, this military takeover, and we'd be right behind him when he did. And all of that's gone now. All our hopes are shattered now because of the crucifixion. So they were utterly disappointed, and then finally they were puzzled. Verses 22 to 24. All this stuff about these women suddenly popping up. They'd been to the tomb. They were there early this morning. They say they didn't find his body. They came and told us that they'd seen a vision of angels who said he was alive. Then some of our companions went to the tomb and found it just as the women had said, but him they did not see. They don't know what to make of it. The idea of resurrection, they don't believe that. They don't accept that. So they are completely confused. They're disappointed. They are sad. They are bemused. They are in consternation. They are in darkness. And it's bad enough that Jesus was taken from them in this most brutal, terrible way. But now all of this, it's almost like they're saying, I wish all this would just go away. We just want to crawl into a hole somewhere and just cry. That's the kind of mentality that they have. But what does Jesus do with them? Well, he begins to rebuke them. This is not a very comforting way to deal with confused, sad, broken-hearted people. You wouldn't get your certificate in Christian counseling, would you, by behaving like this today? But the thing is, Jesus knows exactly why they're in the state they're in, and he knows exactly what they need to get out of it. So he begins to challenge them, even gently, to rebuke them. How foolish you are, how slow of heart to believe all that the prophets have spoken. And then he could have just said, hey, look, it's me. He could have sort of taken off his robes. He could have given them a sort of experience like they did on the Mount of Transfiguration, and light coming out of him. He's the risen Lord after all. But no, he doesn't do that. He points them back to the Old Testament. He doesn't even remind them of what Jesus himself said. He tells them about the solid foundation, even before the words of Jesus, in the words of the God of the Old Testament. These people are from a Jewish background, after all. The prophets, Moses, the whole law. What did it say about the Messiah? And this is how he sums it up. Did not the Christ have to suffer these things and then enter his glory? You are so confused. You're so upset. You're so bemused by all of this. But look, it seems to me this fits in perfectly with what your Jewish scriptures always was saying from the beginning. And then as they walk along this 7-mile journey, and he's just joined them, so we'll say that it was 7 miles that they were walking and talking, and beginning with Moses and all the prophets, he explained to them what was said in all the scriptures concerning himself. Now, they still don't know that he is this person that he's talking about. Again, there is a kind of humor, at least an irony in all of this. It sort of makes you smile, doesn't it? And he's giving them this Bible study. What a Bible study this must have been. Wouldn't you have given almost anything to have been there, to be the fourth person in that group, tagging behind, listening in, how Jesus interpreted the Old Testament? In all the scriptures, he's referred to, which I don't think means every verse or even every chapter explicitly, but in every major section of the Old Testament. The law, that's the beginning, the law of Moses, the prophets, that's a little bit later on, and the Psalms, that's the bit in the middle. Every bit of the Old Testament is basically a preparation, a launching pad for the coming of the Messiah, and he would have proved to them again and again and again that yes, there was glory to come, but first there must be suffering. That was the bit that the Jews were not too keen on and had underplayed and undervalued. And even though Jesus' teaching was perfectly in alignment with what the Old Testament said, when it happened, they hadn't got that. They didn't want that. And who does? Who wants a suffering Messiah? We want the glory without the suffering. But it ain't going to happen. And it didn't happen that way. That's how Jesus answers their questions. They still don't realize who he is, though he's giving them. And I think one of the reasons he's doing this is because he's laying the foundation for them to show them and to make them solid in their faith. He's restoring their faith. And the way we do that is by teaching people the Bible, the whole Bible, all of the Old Testament, all of the New Testament, with Christ as the key. Because when he goes back to heaven, they'll go back to the Old Testament. The New Testament will be written and be gathered within a relatively short space of time. And these are the principles on which their faith, a solid living faith, can rest and can grow. How did the two men eventually come to recognize that the stranger is actually the Savior? Well, they get back to their home after this long journey. It's late at night. They say, "Don't go away. Come in, have a meal with us." As they're eating, Jesus does something very strange. He assumes the position of the host, but he's the guest. He takes the position of the head of the household with authority, because that's who he is. He's the Messiah. He's the head of his people. And this meal, which I suppose has echoes of the Holy Communion, and certainly the Passover meals that they'd shared with Jesus, there was something in the way he said it, something in the way he did it. And did they see the nail prints in his hands as he broke the bread? There's great mystery in here. But it was at that very moment they recognized him, and he disappeared from their sight. Were not our hearts burning within us while he talked with us on the road and opened the scriptures to us? So their hearts are burning, their hearts are opened, their lives are being healed and put back together. It even affects their mouth and their feet, because it says they returned at once to Jerusalem. At once! It's late at night, 7 miles. Did they run all the way? They got back, and what did they say? It's true! The Lord has risen and has appeared to Simon. And I'm sure they went on to say, and he's appeared to us. The resurrection, my friend, the victory over enemies, opposition, the victory over death, the greatest historical fact of all time, and the greatest thing that'll ever happen to you. I wish I had that Lady Gwen with me here today to say, oh yeah, I was confused about that at one stage. But through the teaching of the Bible, Old Testament, New Testament, with Christ as the key, I came to understand he is risen. The Lord is risen. I came to know him and love him and follow him. I was baptized, and I've been following the Lord ever since. My friend, do you know this victory over confusion, the resurrection in your life, the power of it? Amen. See you tomorrow. God bless.